our water infrastructure, it's in deep trouble. And it's being underlined by these little canary in a coal mine events like Flint, Michigan, and so forth. But there's much more happening that is just not being talked about. There's a real estate boom going on in North Texas, between Dallas and the Oklahoma border. It's going so much faster than putting in utilities. They're not even trying. So here, to me, the solution leapt out to the infrastructure problem, but also the opportunity, which is we're going to have to unburden the grid. We're going to have to take businesses off the grid and make them do their own water treatment. It's called decentralized water. It's going to relieve the central grid because they're not getting the money anyway. And who's going to build a big sewage plant here in Pinellas County where it's already overbuilt? So not going to happen. So just relieve the burden. Make the industry and agriculture players do their own water treatment. And Bob's your uncle. Now, what's interesting is they like it. That's what I learned, and that's what's propelling the boom of our company today. Like we get, let's say, a brewery is being forced to truck half its water to another county because the local utility won't take it, and so they're forced to do their own thing. But then they go, oh, this isn't bad because number one, I can control the water rates. Do you know that water and sewage rates are inflating at the same rate as college tuition?
I did not know that at all. No.
The high hospital services. Next below that is college tuition, and water is right there with it. So it's hurting people, but it's also hurting businesses. And they're like, okay, so if I do my own water treatment, then I can control costs, right? Because on the water treatment side, I don't have to pay sewage rates. I'm permitted to just dump it into the groundwater, which is perfectly good, and that way it recharges the aquifer. Everything's great. On the incoming water, since I'm able to recycle, I'm paying less incoming water fees as well for the potable water. And thirdly, there's less regulatory noise from the city. I'm on my own. It's great. So those three reasons are big drivers. And that's propelling that finally a change is starting to happen. Water companies generally grow at only like 10, 15% a year. We're growing 2x, 3x per year. We're doubling and tripling per year because of this wave. And large companies like PepsiCo has committed to 80% recycling of their water. Well, you can only recycle if you do it your own treatment. If you send it to the city, it's never coming back. So that's the breakthrough. And then we had that breakthrough coming into the COVID, and then COVID hit. And at the time, this is February 2020, we saw the first crash of the price of crude, and we're like, oh, there's a problem. Wuhan closed for a month. We got a problem. And this is before the lockdowns. This is before the CARES Act, all this stuff. And we're like, this is going to be a real problem. And people are going to run out of money. And so we came up with the idea of water as a service. Like, we'll install that system in your business. We'll continue to own that piece of equipment. We'll maintain it. And you just pay by the gallon. And that became water on demand. That was the last piece. So that's today what we have is decentralized water with these compact systems called modular water systems combined with the capital solutions. So it kind of works like GM and GM Financial. Because we operate more in the mid-band, $500,000 to $2 million systems, they have to be standardized like hotcakes. They can't be this, we'll take, 2 years to install your system BS that goes on, which means that we have a scalable business and we can ramp it up. So that's the exciting moment we're in right now. We're starting to move the needle.
Yeah, that's very niche, I would say, as far as a business model goes. I don't know if you thought, if you could, go back in time, did you think you'd be working in something like this specific? At least I think it's very niche in terms of, it's something like you mentioned earlier, you just turn the faucet on, the water comes on. Like I don't think about it really probably on a day-to-day basis. It's something I almost just take for granted, the ability that you have, water that just works. And I'm actually a little nervous to look up my zip code on there. Not that I would think it has anything weird about it, but I live in downtown Rochester, Minnesota. I'm hopeful that we're pretty good. We're right next to Mayo Clinic. We're treating people for a variety of health conditions. Hopefully we're doing a pretty good job. But yeah, Riggs, I think another aspect that got me thinking about it is your company is public, right? So you could invest in the company's stock, but are Americans able to invest in water projects like this, or can they invest directly in, a type of water project? Is that possible?
Sure. Well, OriginClear has been a small public company for 14 years now, and it's listed. You can invest in it. Great. But in addition, what you can do is you can become an investor in these bundles of water projects that we put together to make, because if I make it free for the brewery owner, well, who pays for the machine, right? So what we did was we decided to emulate the oil well master limited partnership model, which regular investors can get. Each of these MLPs is about 60 of them, $300 billion market. It's not niche once it grows. They can invest directly in that, and each one of those MLPs is a basket of properties, pipelines, gas, oil, nicely diversified, and they get royalties. And that's a really good model. So we decided to emulate that. And so water on demand is that, and you can invest in what we call water like an oil well. And what's great about it is, in addition to getting stock, because we do that, stock in the public company, but in addition, you have royalties and a lien capability on the equipment to enforce your royalty, which makes it asset backed. So that's a really interesting model. People like it a lot. It's interesting because early stage booms always start at a level that is like, I remember in 1993, there were these weird internet utilities. It was nothing much. It was kind of like, I think one had a name of an animal. I mean, it was like these weird things. It was not until Mark Andreessen's browser came along that it just kind of like blew up. Well, it's very deceiving. You think that this is nothing, but that's precisely when you want to look at it. If it's not too early, 10 years ago, it would have been too early, but now it's starting to ramp. Back in May, there was a first unicorn in a long time in the water industry, and they are doing this decentralized water treatment for large companies. They have Merck, they have all, the big food and beverage companies and so forth. They're very prestigious. They manage, they have fund money behind them. That's great. It's a good business. There's only so many of those, right? But there's many, many more of the middle class of water treatment, which is where we like to be. So that's an indication that water tech is taking off. Now, the decentralization thing is interesting because anytime you have something goes from centralized to decentralized, you have a huge boom in the economy of that thing. For example, AT&T broke up, and it resulted in all the baby bells and MCI and VoIP and eventually the internet, all of it. And it all came out of this one just dislocation that occurred. When it's all monopolized and centralized, it doesn't move. It doesn't develop. People like you and me don't get involved because it's a dull job. Well, I'm going to go work for AT&T for 30 years. Right. It's not to denigrate AT&T. They delivered very good tech, but the monopoly concept was bad, just as a monopoly concept is bad for water. Here's why. In Ireland, water is free for people, for regular people. Why isn't it free here? Well, because 90% of the use is by industry and agriculture. We get those off the grid. Now we can start relieving the burden and servicing people properly. I meant to ask you, Eric, what is your zip code?
55904.
All right, let's
take a look at it.
Yes, sir. There's a few subdivisions. Which do you know? Briarwood, Byron, Chester Heights. There's a bunch. Wow. Rochester. I'll take
there.
Rochester.
It is. Yep, Rochester right there. Yep.
All right. So what I have 9 contaminants detected, 20 total, but 9 exceed the health guidelines. So what are they? Well, you've got bromodichloromethane, which is 12 times. Now, the utility, of course, is compliant, 0.725 parts per billion, but EWG has determined is 0.06 parts per billion. So that's 12 times. Haloacetic acid is 28 times. Another one is 94 times. So they exceed guidelines, right? Now, there's only 9 out of 20 others that are fine. Toluene, fluoride, dioxane, they're good, right? That's the problem that we have. So these utilities will be able to focus on this more because they'll be servicing the regular people. They'll be unburdened, and water rates don't have to keep skyrocketing. There's a serious default rate by people not paying their water bills and being cut off. And now you got to go get your water in a bottle. It gets even worse, right? So this is, to me, a social justice thing. We've got to get industry off this central grid so it goes back to servicing the people.
Yeah, and you mentioned decentralization versus centralization. So that got me thinking, in terms of maybe the blockchain or crypto and different ways that, in the finance space and the asset-backed space, how we're kind of seeing that more and more and more. And you are actually you're pioneering some water stable coins, are you not? In terms of being able to have an asset that is backed by water. Is that something that you're currently working on?
Yes. Well, in 2018, when things were kind of wild and crazy, I pioneered something called Water Chain, which was a blockchain solution. The problem that we ran into was a very simple one, is that there's no standardized price for water. It varies widely depending on jurisdiction. So how do you get a market? And it wasn't until we developed water on demand, where every single gallon is paid for on these operating contracts. You start multiplying those, and then you clone water on demand to different regions. So you have a water on demand. We wouldn't do it, but we'd have a finance partner in Singapore, for example, do it for Singapore, et cetera, Singapore, Malaysia. And you start multiplying these water on demands, and now they're all equivalent because people are paying in the local currency roughly the same amount of money per gallon that they would elsewhere, because it's the same base cost. It's no longer based on the scarcity of the resource, which is why Colorado River water, varies by 10,000% depending where you get it from, or whose rights you have. That goes away, and you get a pretty level playing field. And the reason why there's no international water market or even a national one is because of that problem. If I have a water problem in Northern California, I can't buy options on Singapore water. I can't do it. I can't hedge my risk. But under this new model, we can. So that's where we're moving towards. What I felt was important to do was let's get our basic business going. Let's proliferate that. Blockchain can't operate in a vacuum. It's like, well, what are you blockchaining? Well, I have a cool concept, and everybody should join it, and we'll go to the moon, and everybody gets screwed by like Sam Bankman-Fried did. No, this is not. The new model is to create something that has solid backing, is asset based. For example, we can take these dividend payments and tokenize them. That's a great idea. But for now, ACH is just fine. And here's a final issue with tokens, is that the SEC doesn't like them. And I'm regularly going to the SEC to get registered for various offerings. And the last thing I need is them to go, what's this token you got? And are you marketing a security? And I was like, you know what? We're just going to hold off for now, and there'll be plenty of time. So I think there's a future in water stablecoins. But as I say, job one is to establish the base business.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's probably a smart play to be nice with the SEC as of right now with all the touch points you have with them. But Riggs, yeah, this is all very interesting. I think that a lot of people listening probably are thinking like I am, in terms of you're clearly disrupting something that is, has been stagnant or has been steady for a period of time. And that's exciting for someone hearing that as either an entrepreneur or someone that's aspiring to maybe start a company of their own. Do you have maybe a blanketed statement of advice for someone that wants to disrupt? Or is there is there something that a person could maybe look for if they're not certain of what area they want to disrupt in? Yours, obviously, you shared your story with us and kind of how you got to where you are. So there's obviously some natural, play to it. And there could be, a combination of hard work and luck that leads you to an opportunity. But yeah, just kind of as a general statement for someone that wants to disrupt, what would your advice be to that person?
Well, I think where I've given myself a hard time with disruption is where I've gone in to a space without a thorough, infiltrated knowledge of it. I remember in the early 80s, I started a business in New York City selling business computers, first generation business computers. And the first one I sold, I did not even know where the on switch was, right? I was like, how complicated could it be? And I found somebody who was interested in buying a computer. And I said, and they go, well, let's see how it works. I'm like, wait, where's the on switch? So I don't advise that. That caused me a lot of. I was then learning. I had 12 people on a New York City payroll, Manhattan payroll. It was royally painful. So I learned on the job, but it proved to be actually one of my toughest learning experiences. I literally gave up on that business and handed it over to a guy who did a great job with it. But that was a learning experience. Okay, get some familiarity. You got to have that. And that's the number one thing. Now, having done that does not mean you have to take a 20-year job with a Fortune 500 corporation. Just get to know it, try to apprentice in some way, get up to speed, and try things in a microcosm as a side gig or whatever, and then jump into it. And at that point, I advise just go for it and do the rest of the learning in the pool.
Yeah, and would you say that was a example of the mistake-based marketing initially, like kind of that learning from that failure, so to speak, before, you developed, your skill set to be able to get to the next step? I mean, if you didn't know where the on switch was that time, that certainly wasn't going to be probably a mistake that you were going to make again in the future. You were gonna have done your research, right? Is that kind of
mistake-based marketing is just consciously trying things out in the market, and presumably you know what the heck you're doing. The reason why I gave up on that business was, again, because of a lack of really being in the business deeply, because what I didn't realize was I was creating first-time users, business users of computers, and it was incredibly tough, hard work, et cetera, not really profitable. But what I didn't realize is there was a life cycle of supporting these people for 20 years that is incredibly rich. And that's what my buddy Juan, he took this over, and he made it that business. To this day, he has clients that we opened together in the 80s in New York City. That's an incredible amount of annuity, and that's what I didn't fully realize. So that's why it's so important to have, really embed yourself in the industry. I think it's super important.
Yeah, and building that skill set, and probably finding out at the same time what is igniting you, what is fulfilling you or fueling your passion, so to speak, to want to work more on those things. So obviously entrepreneurship has been a big piece of that for you for the extended period of time, and leadership as well. And you mentioned pre-interview that you're getting ready to even start your own podcast. So that's extremely exciting, and wish you the best of luck on that. And Riggs, as we kind of close down, just one last question for you. Is there a myth about entrepreneurship that you want to debunk on the podcast today? Something that maybe is widely believed to be true, but you have found out this is not the case, and you want to make sure that people do not, fall victim to that false belief?
Well, I think the biggest myth out there and it prevents people in corporate America from making the jump, even if they're frustrated, and that is that it's the uncertainty, right? I was listening to an interview of Matt Taibbi on Joe Rogan, and he said, I'm being paid many times what I was paid at Rolling Stone, many times, because he's on Substack, and it's got this great Substack did a great disruption of the publishing space. And so he's doing really, really well. So it is not impossible. I have a nephew who he cracked the code on Amazon selling. He's freaking brilliant. It's not something I would do because it's not what I am, but he did it. And this stuff is doable. It's hard to find a niche and something you love and get some traction in it, but it's not as hard or as risky as people think to develop the business and get into revenue.
Very sound advice. Really appreciate hearing that. Kind of ignite my fire, so to speak, as we close this episode. And it just dawned on me how appropriate the name of the company is, OriginClear. You're dealing with water. You're also extremely transparent, and water is transparent. So it's all coming together here at the end, Riggs. So again, can't thank you enough for being a guest on the podcast today. We'll look forward to keeping up with you in the future, and best of luck with everything, sir.
Eric, it was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it, and keep up the good work, okay?
Thank you, sir. You too.